Hey everyone, Genome here with the first episode of Was It Good? What, may you ask, is Was It Good? Well, it's something of a walk down memory lane, a wee bit of nostalgia, mostly from the period of my childhood, from the 80s and early to mid 90s. I'm Generation Xer. I was actually born in the 70s, but I digress. At any rate, I want to take a look back and see if the things that I enjoyed back then were actually any good and still hold up today. You know, we have a tendency of putting on the rose-tinted glasses when it comes to certain things from our younger days and automatically just assume that it's good, even though we may have outgrown it or our taste may have changed. So the first thing I'll look at is probably, I don't want to say my favorite album, but one of my favorite albums of all time when I was younger. And that's Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation. The album came out in 1987. What was I doing in 1987? That's a good question. If memory serves, I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade, somewhere around that area. So, 11, 12 years old, in that age range. Quick little bit of history about how this album kind of came into, let's say, my focus. My family, we used to take trips to Iowa every year to visit my dad's older kids. And so one night, my cousins and I were all over at the house, and we were, of course, watching MTV with the babysitter. The babysitter was about 16, 17, probably, in that area. So, this is back when MTV was cool. Something that people actually got together to do and to check out all the new movies and videos. It was kind of a cultural phenomenon at the time. It was really taking off big. And it kind of moved its way out of the whole, I guess, new wave, faux synth pop kind of era, and it's kind of moving into a little more of the pop rock mainstream, if you will. So while we're up there watching, at the time, well, let me backtrack just a little bit. At the time, I think the biggest thing going was Def Leppard, and Def Leppard's Pour Some Sugar on Me was like the #1 video for God knows how long, a long time. It was always there, and all his kids loved it, and we just thought it was the best thing ever, and nothing's ever going to surpass it. It's going to stay on top forever. So I'm up there in Iowa, being babysitted no less, with my other, about the same age, cousin, and then I think one of his friends is over too, so we're all about the same age frame. And so the video countdown comes on, and lo and behold, Pour Some Sugar on Me is #2. Well, what's going on here? This is not within the realm of normalcy. So who usurped it? Well, it was a single Ragdoll from the album Permanent Vacation. And I remember when I first saw it, the video, mind you, we didn't have cable back home, so I had to watch MTV at friends' houses and that sort of thing. So I was just kind of blown away. It's like, well, what is this? I'm not really hip on this song. This is kind of strange, because no way this is better than Pour Some Sugar on Me. I mean, that was our anthem for preteen angst, I guess you would call it at the time. So I didn't give it much of a chance, and I actually didn't pay it too much mind. But I don't know if the video airplay really piqued interest in the song and the album itself, because I started hearing it more on the radio, and for whatever reason, it kind of grew on me. Part of it might have been, I might have mentioned the band name to my mom, and my mom listened to a lot of, at the time, I don't think it was even called classic rock, but rock from the 70s and stuff, and she was a little more on the softer side of things, like Seals and Crofts, America, that sort of thing. Throw some James Taylor in there, and it's all great music. But I don't remember her being a big fan of the heavier rock scene in the 70s, of which Aerosmith was a integral part. They were pretty insane back then, especially on the Toys of the Attic and Rock's days, So maybe that helped pique my interest a little bit, and she kind of, if memory serves, she turned me on to some of the older songs that I didn't know was theirs. More of the radio-friendly stuff like Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, that sort of thing. So, for whatever reason, I got to liking it, and decided I had to have the album all of a sudden. That's the only song I'd heard off it. Oh, I think Dude Looks Like a Lady was the single, too, around that same time. I hadn't heard any Angel yet. on the radio. Actually, now I think about it, I don't think I ever heard Angel on the radio. But once again, I digress. So in order for me to get this album was its own little mini venture in itself, you know, back in the 80s. I was mowing lawns in the neighborhood when we lived in the neighborhood. I go out and mow lawn for, you know, $3-4, and that's how I got my spending money. So I had a cassette player. I think I'd gotten it for Christmas a year or two earlier. So I went out and bought my very first cassette, and that was Permanent Vacation. And I think back then it was either, I can't remember if it was $9 or $11. It was one of those two weird odd numbers. You know, big money in them days for a tape. So I get it, bring it home, and you know, I probably listened to that song, that album, hundreds of times. Ragdoll in particular, probably thousands of times. I must have played it 3 times a morning for probably hit the first year I had that stupid tape. I about wore the damn thing out. It was getting a little weak at the end. You know, constant play, reverse, so, you know, way before the advent of CDs when it was so easy. You actually had to, I think I had the timing down in my head too, to hold down reverse for like 12.6 seconds or whatever the nonsense was. But anyway, yeah, so I listened to that album a lot. And, you know, I thought it was just the best thing ever. And getting back to what I think about it now. So I hadn't revisited the album in a long time. Maybe I burnt myself out on it. I had most of Aerosmith's albums up to Get a Grip, and then I kind of started petering off of that and got into a little bit of a heavier scene, a little more electronics back in the, I don't know, mid to late 90s and then 2000s. But, you know, it has been a while, and it was a piece of nostalgia, and I want to go back and think, you know, it's still the greatest album ever. And in all honesty, it's not the greatest album ever. Was it a great album? I would say it is a great album. There's a lot of hits and a lot of misses on that album. I'd say it's almost divided by half about what I would call an enjoyable song for me, as opposed to just a solid song. Let's take some examples, for instance. Okay, so the first song, Heart's Done Time. It's a good opener, got a lot of energy. Honestly though, it's quite forgettable. I don't remember it too far after listening to it. You know, if it was on the radio, I would probably not turn it off. But I wouldn't go hunting for it. You know, that kind of song. The second song, Magic Touch, I like it a little better. It's still not a great re-listening song. I do like some of the crescendos in that song. So I used to listen to it quite a bit when I was younger. Hearing it now, it doesn't do as much for me. And the third song is Ragdoll. Okay, well, that was the song that started it all. Probably the song I've listened to more than any other in my life. You know, I could probably devote a whole segment just on the song. And the great thing is it still holds up. And what I find interesting about it is that I don't see how it ever became a hit. You know, it doesn't sound like the standard rocker. It doesn't even really sound like Aerosmith, to be honest with you. So take the band out of the equation, and I still don't see how the song made it as it did. It's got a weird beat. It's got a weird rhythm. There's freaking horns in the background. Not even saxophone. Like the early 80s got inundated with saxophone in music, much to my annoyance, especially now. But yeah, it had horns. In fact, the horns overshadowed, especially in maybe the second half of the song, in the latter parts, really kind of overshadowed most of everything but the solos. So very, very, just an odd duck song, but man, it was classic. It still sounds good. The production values are off the charts. The drums come through crisp. It's one of the few guitar solos I can stand. I'm not a fan of guitar solos. I've never been a huge one. Very few people do it well. You know, Perry and Whitford, they can hold an interest in a solo, and that's pretty rare. I mean, other than, say, Mark Knopfler, maybe Robbie Krieger, there's not too many others that I would actually care to listen to as far as guitar solos go. Usually, I kind of turn my brain off when those come up in songs. But, yeah, so it was, how should we say this, a sonic achievement, if you ask me, and it really kind of just thrust them back into, dare I say, the limelight. I mean, this is a band that was huge in the 70s, big, one of the biggest rock bands in America, if not the biggest, for a long period of time. and then they had about a 10-year dry spell while the band was getting their act together, basically, from drugs and booze. So, and they had released a few albums too, and including in the early 80s, but they didn't really meet any success, meet any mainstream appeal. So really it's a band that was basically forgotten about. And then along comes this single, and it just blows the album wide open. And they sold, I think, around 5 million copies, something like that eventually, is what it wound up being. So basically their biggest success, I believe, at that point. And yeah, a large part of it was due to the single. So anyway, I don't want to sit there all day on Ragdoll. Like I said, it was just a real fond memory of mine, but this definitely a memory I believe that holds up. I believe there's a lot that the song has to offer musically and stylistically that should be appreciated now. The fourth song in the album was Cimaraya. Once again, a good song. I don't think it's anything too special though. It's got an interesting echo on the Cimaraya kind of refrain or whatever, but it's just doesn't grab my interest too much anymore. Fifth song is Dude Looks Like a Lady. Now I think this is probably either second or their biggest hit on the album, and frankly I've never could stand the song. Just don't like it at all. Don't know why. I just maybe I'm just biased against it taking some of the Ragdoll thunder or something. I don't know, but other than the "What a Funky Lady" bit, I just don't like the song. What can I say? I'm just strange like that. The sixth song and the last song on side one was St. John. Now this is a freaking gem of an Aerosmith song, and it kind of, I don't know if it's Jimi Hendrixon kind of guitar sound, but what it reminds me of a lot is like a sequel, if they ever made one, to the song Kings and Queens. You know, you get this idea of this either Viking or Crusader just kind of strolling across the land, you know, wielding his axe like some sort of broadsword. But the song is incredible, and it is a little odd, and the guitar hits pretty unexpectedly at first until you kind of get used to their sway and all, but it's kind of a jazzy, you know, just kind of something you would hear in a smoky bar somewhere with they're drinking brandy out of big balloon glasses, but it's a great one, and it's a great way to close out the first half of the album. I don't think it could have done it better, to be honest with you. So side one, probably the most popular of the two sides. That's still debatable. Solid. It's good. I actually believe though that side two is probably even better. In fact, some of the songs are much better. Let's take the first song on side two. This is actually the seventh song of the album. That's Hangman Jury. Hangman Jury is, if it reminds me of any song of Aerosmith's, it's like Train Kept a Rolling. It's got energy. It's upbeat. It's just odd. Another just odd song, and I think this one actually had some chart success as well. Not like the aforementioned Ragdoll or Dude Looks Like a Lady or another one we'll talk about later. But so I think it got a little radio play. I mean that iconic line, "I swear I didn't know that 45 was loaded." In fact, my memory ain't too clear. It's a great song, and quite possibly the best song on the album. If I was to honestly say, now hearing it, taking all nostalgia out of it, it probably is the best song on that album. And once again, it's just different. You know, it's not what you would consider a radio-friendly song, especially at the time. You know, it was, I mean, while things musically were a little bit wide open, it was still pretty well structured. You are a rock band, so you're going to do a rock-style song. And while there's rock elements to it, the Hangman Jury, of course, it's got some very just different pacing. It's even got kind of a Beatlesque for the band in the background. It's just a great song. So definitely, if I had to recommend one song that someone would listen to on this album who had never heard it before, I would probably start them with this one. As long as they weren't just a complete musical neophyte, you know, and couldn't understand or enjoy something that was a little different. Song 8, Girl Keeps Coming Apart. I never really was a fan of this song either. It just moves. I think it's more of a filler song. That's how I feel about that one. The ninth song is possibly, I don't read the charts or anything before I do these kind of videos, is possibly their biggest hit on this album, and it's the monster rock ballad Angel. It's good, you know, as far as power ballads go. Is there much better? Not much, you know. There's not much else to say about it. It was the decade of power ballads, and well, this is a good one, you know. I like Steven's vocals on this a lot, actually. He does sound kind of like he is trying to connect the audience. I mean, he sounds bigger in life, like most, you know, artists do on albums, but he sounds a little closer, like he's singing to you across the living room or something. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain, but some of those big ballads, they can definitely sound like they're actually up on the stage, and he doesn't really sound like that to me in this song. So that's what makes it a pretty good one as far as ballads go. So, you know, definitely a high point on the album. And once again, I guess they can get away with it because they were never too heavy in the 80s. So yeah, I guess they can get away with the ballad, you know, every now and then. Not generally what you would think of as Aerosmith. Now, they got more that way in basically every album after that. They got a little more ballad-y, but this one was still kind of a strange addition. I'm glad they, of course, included it, and I'm sure they are too, but it's definitely worth a listen. So, the 10th song and title track, Permanent Vacation. They try to do some fun stuff with it. I don't care for it much, especially now. I think I liked it a little better when I was younger. As a side note, I think it would look good to have them like at a tiki bar or something for the photo or for the album art instead of the cover they had on there. You know, just them doing like the whole cocktail thing with big umbrellas and everything and straw hats and all that, sitting around a tiki bar. But whatever. The inner picture was very good though. While I believe the album art was pretty bad in this album, I do like the inner photo they had of them. That was a pretty good one, I thought. So Permanent Vacation was kind of what I consider almost a throwaway song. It reminds me of something like, something off the White Album, you know, just something you want to play around with artistically, just to see what they can do with it. And yeah, I don't think it holds up too well. 11th song is I'm Down. Well, this is a Beatles cover, and I'm the world's biggest Beatle fan, or at least in West Virginia. But Aerosmith is one of the few bands that does the Beatles justice when they do covers, and most of the time they improve on them. I gotta say, in this version of I'm Down, I would hazard to say, yeah, they do a better job than the Beatles did with it. You know, some of that can be attributed to advances in recording and studio wizardry, if you will, but Steven Tyler has a better voice for it. He can maintain his scream throughout the song, I think, much better than Paul ever could. Paul did well on some songs where he had to really let loose. For instance, when he did like Helter Skelter, he nailed it there. And so he could do it from time to time, but Steven just did it better, and he seemed to be able to sustain it much better. It seemed to come more natural to him. So yeah, he belted it out. You can tell the band had a good time with it. You can tell it used to be in their cover rotation or something because they just play it flawless. So yeah, I doubt even Paul would say that they didn't do a better job with it than the Beatles did. And you'll never hear me say that too often because, once again, I'm the world's biggest Beatles fan. So, or should I say West Virginia's biggest Beatles fan, but they really do it justice. The other one they did Come Together. I think it was back in the 70s when they did it, and they did that one really well too. Honestly, from a musical standpoint, it probably sounds better than the original. I still like the original better, most because it Come Together had, when the Beatles did it, had seemed more of a impersonal kind of sound to it, more like a, I don't know, like you're hearing the conversation in the next booth over, like the person singing in the next booth over. That wouldn't raise alarms at all, but which I thought fit the song pretty well because it was such a disjointed song. So I do like the original better, and it had a less produced sound to it, if that makes any sense. But getting back to I'm Down, yeah, Aerosmith nailed it on this one. It's a good song. I mean, it's not, once again, it wasn't one of my favorite Beatles songs. It still isn't. But it's a good, solid song on this album, and a good inclusion. It doesn't feel like a filler song. It just feels like something that the band really wanted to do, you know. And finally, to close out the album was the instrumental song. It's called The Movie. The movie is great. It's a great close. They're pretty good. Aerosmith is good at closing an album. I believe it was in Get a Grip when they closed out with Amazing, for example. And Amazing, while it wasn't my favorite song in the world, I love the guitar outro and solo that goes on for a few minutes afterwards. It's much better than the song I think it's attached to. And it was just a great way to close, you know. But as for the movie, it's a completely instrumental song, so there's not even a vocal lead in. Now there are some samples in there of someone talking, and I think like a newscaster or something, radio kind of voice kind of in the background. Technically it's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. I probably would have liked it better if they omitted it. I just like that kind of heartbeat thrum they got going in the background, and the solo is just rocking. It is something. I don't know if there's any truth to it. I've always considered, you know, the big guitar solo ending of November Rain to sound a hell of a lot like what was going on in the movie as far as guitar, you know, let's call them guitar gymnastics go. But it's a great closer, and I think a fitting way to end what I consider a really good album. Now, all that being said, what do I actually think about the album? Do I think it was a great album? Let's give you some reference. You know, let's take a scale, something like this. A scale of terrible, you know, takes years off your life, kind of bad, to outstanding, amazing, you know, genre-defining, decade-defining. Where does Permanent Vacation fall within that spectrum? I'd say it falls into good to great. Now it leaned a little more towards great, because what they did right in this album was just stupendous. You know, it was kind of their, I would call it their Phoenix album, you know, that kind of rose from the ashes of what they were falling into and kind of reinvented themselves a little bit. And it, doing so, they had to change a little bit about what they did best, but it just worked, and it continued to work for them. I think it still works for them to this day. Now, I don't really listen to much of their newer stuff, and honestly, I haven't gotten really any albums of theirs since, I believe, Get a Grip, because my taste kind of changed in music and all that. But, you know, they're still out there doing it, and, you know, that says a lot. So, yeah, I would definitely call it still a great album, even today. Rose-tinted glasses are off. And it's definitely worth checking out. Is it their strongest album ever? Probably not. And for those, for me, you probably have to go back to the 70s, to Toys in the Attic, Rocks, something like that. I liked a little more of the raw sound that they had, and a little less poppy feeling. But Aerosmith is so talented, they can even do pop well, which I don't enjoy pop really that much at all. But anyway, hey, I was young. So, but anyway, long story short, give the album a try, check it out, download it, borrow it from a friend. Better yet, have someone record it for you on cassette so you can kind of relive the experience again. But yeah, it's a great walk back to see how a band kind of self-destructed and then resurrected and then became something greater than what they were, at least from a popularity and commercial standpoint. So I hope you enjoyed this, and the rest of my reviews may not be so long-winded, but once again, this album was a big part of my youth, and that's another reason I wanted to lead off with it. Well, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want to call me an idiot, you want to call me a genius, just put something down there below in the comments and let me hear about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I should have more content coming out shortly. I have some more interviews lined up, and my next piece of nostalgia will probably be another album that I listened to quite a bit back in the 80s, but that remains to be seen. It might be a different medium. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and this is Genome, out.